Welcome to Toy Business Unboxed, your gateway to the secrets of the toy industry. Here, Jason Shea, a toy entrepreneur and expert in the field.
Every product we develop is really inspired by some of the real life experience that we have with our son.
60% of all toys last year were sold on Amazon, which is incredible.
Be passionate about it because it's a road, it's a journey.
Like when you have an idea that you think is like gonna somewhat like change the world, make things better, I'd say go for it.
We'll guide you through the enchanting world of toy design, marketing, and manufacturing. Now let the unboxing begin.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Toy Business Unboxed. Today, we're joined by Molly, the powerhouse behind Flying Leap Game, a company that's all about building connection, making people laugh, and creating unforgettable experience through games. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, Molly.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me and Flying Leap Games on today.
Yeah, and first of all, can you just kind of share a little bit about your stories, about how you even started this company a few years ago? What was your motivation behind it?
Sure. Actually, the company origin story is from 2010. So that's a whole 15 years ago.
Okay.
I had decided upon turning 26 and just starting a new job in the fair trade industry, actually. I used to be in social enterprises. That I needed to plan to go back to business school in 3 to 5 years, and that I was going to save for it by either writing a book or inventing something and selling 1 million copies. So on my 26th birthday, I began to write a book on how to fail well. And I didn't get very far and decided I hadn't failed enough yet. So that summer, instead, since I love board games, I dreamed up a game based on the book Would You Rather, all about funny situations it puts you into. I thought, well, what if you had a game where you were put into crazy situations and then you were given resources to tell a story about how you'd get out of that problematic situation? Well, that summer, I called my friend John, who I had been friends with since we were 11 and 12 in elementary school. And I asked him if he wanted to create a game. I told him the idea. He immediately improved upon it. And we actually worked on it off and on over the course of 4 years. I mean, we had one break. So then we began playtesting it. I went to business school. I still worked on it during business school, turning it into a business. And that was our first game, Wing It, our bestseller, actually. And then when I actually started the business was a little over 7.5 years ago in 2017. I was suddenly let go of a job after moving to New York City. I'd been literally living in Brooklyn for 6 weeks and lost a job. And so I sat in a park for 4 hours, actually cried and didn't know what to do. And then I realized, wait, I already have a product. I'm already pretty far along starting a business. Maybe I'll just go for it. And so the company was born like a phoenix out of the ashes after losing a job. John and I launched our Kickstarter that summer, and we launched our first product that fall of 2017. And so I actually have been full-time now over 7.5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. I see. Thank you for sharing that. And I think in the pre-interview, you also mentioned about a moment during the Gamma trade show that really has changed, can you also share some of that story as well?
Yes. After all these years, it's still actually one of my favorite stories. So this was what Jason isn't referring to is a night that changed everything for me and my company, our company. By the way, I didn't mention earlier, John and I are also co-founders. So we came up with the first few games together, although he has exited. I will often refer to it as our company. So for clarity's sake, well, let's see, that night at Gamma. So while I mentioned I had started the company, really launched the summer of 2017, I was living off my savings for several months. I also sold my car. That helped me have more money to live off of while we were getting the first game going. And when Gamma, which for listeners who don't know, is the Game Manufacturers Association, was happening in 2018. When that happened, I only had left in my personal bank account 1 month's rent plus $25. So I really needed money. In fact, my parents covered my hostel during my first trip to Gamma. I was getting to the point of being pretty broke. Gamma did not start off smoothly. I actually missed the only large networking event, which was the Sunday night of Gamma. And that happened because I honestly just had a flight delay. So I got in too late to go. But the next night I found out from the calendar for Gamma, there was a retailer-only event that was put on by another company. And I decided to go, near the tail end of it to meet retailers. Because if you're selling to retailers, you need to go meet retailers. At that point, we were in 11 stores in just 4 cities and 4 states, by the way. Speaking of how broke I was, I actually walked to a grocery store in Reno and walked back with my grocery bag because I figured, I'll get a lift later. I'll get a lift later. And walking back 2.4 miles. So I meet my St. Louis retailers outside of this resort and casino and hotel where Gamma was in Reno for many years and walk up with them. And I didn't know anybody else at the bar, by the way. I had my grocery bag and I was ready to make connections. I mean, it felt really ridiculous. All right. In retrospect, I probably seemed pretty ridiculous. And I just began chatting with people, mostly Matt Parker, who owns Batcave Games out in Vancouver, Washington. And I would do a really soft sale. Like I would say, well, when I made our game, this happened. And I eventually, got to a point in the conversation where he wanted to know more. So he said, well, tell you what, why don't I take a look at your game while you eat your cheese? I mean, he knew I wanted to eat. I hadn't had enough for dinner. So I pull out a block of cheese and hand him my game. And I'm sitting there at this bar drinking my rum and Coke, my drink of choice, and eating my cheese. And Matt looks at the game, and I kid you, probably less than 2 minutes in after looking at the back of the game, Matt said, are you selling these? He's like, I'd buy 5 of these right now. Are you on PayPal? And I said, yeah. He's like, well, I'd buy 10 of these right now. I can sell 5 of these right now. Watch me. He was kind of cocky saying he could sell 5 of these right now.
Okay.
Proceeded to stop everyone's conversation in this little inlet, all these retailers, and teach them the game. So he taught it for me, and I'm like, pinch me, please. This is crazy. He teaches them the game, Wing It, basically from the back of the box. They all start playing. That was probably around, I'm going to guess, 9:45 or 10 something on a Monday night of Gamma. And I kid you not, we didn't stop talking and playing the game and having them give me advice for at least 4 hours.
Oh, whoa.
They even called Andrew Zorowitz, who's this retail guru who's now become a publisher. They got him out of bed, so he came down. We got kicked out of one bar called the Edge Nightclub and sent to another area. So we were in the main circle bar that's open all night in this area with these the famous white couches in Gamma. That's where people always used to gather, is the white couches. And we sat there and, we became friends that night, really. And later on, one of them told me, what we liked about you was your authenticity. You just sat on the floor of the bar eating your cheese. And I'm like, well, that's just who I am, And they also said they liked me because I took advice. And they said there are a lot of publishers, and they mentioned particularly young men will come into their stores and they'll have their first game and they won't take advice. I don't know why. I thought, well, this is free advice. This is great for me.
Yeah.
Well, so they liked my authenticity, my willingness to accept advice. And the next day, I just started making sales to people I hadn't even met. Someone wrote me from Florida, said, I just had a baby, so I couldn't make Gamma, but I heard great things about your game. I want to get 12 or 24. And I was kind of in shock, who are you? Whatever.
Yeah.
So then at the actual trade show floor, people started walking up to me to order. Even people who I had cold called and never got back to me began ordering Jason. It was so exciting. Yeah. And not only did we sell really well at that show, I sold 1,007 in 4 weeks. And that was the end of the 2,000 game print run.
Oh, nice.
That's was not
a story.
What John and I thought would happen. It all happened because one night in a bar and schmoozing with retailers and a block of cheese. So that's the story I love to tell because it really changed everything for our company.
Yeah, that's definitely an incredible story and very uncommon. So thank you so much for sharing. And I think that story also highlights the importance of building relationship within the industry. And sometimes it's not what you know, but who you know. And that story that you just shared really is a great example of that. And I know since then, you also have launched a couple other games besides the Wing It games. And what kind of sales and marketing strategy has been working well for your company after all this year?
Sure. And I want to just share for our listeners, for people who don't know my company, you can check us out. We actually have a line of 10 and soon to be 12 games. And we have done, between those to date, 10, 11, 16 print runs.
15. Okay.
Yeah, with 4 more coming. That is where I'm at now, just so people know sort of the arc of the 7.5 years. I would say over the course of that, I have learned a lot, although I still have a long way to go. I want to put that front and center. So in terms of sales, I just, like you were talking about building relationships, that is really at the core of sales for me. One of the key pieces of advice I give people based on my own experiences is to go out to stores, not just to go to Gamma and meet retailers and schmooze at the bar like I always do, but to go to 2 stores. I've actually traveled to over 300 stores across 3 countries over time, Many
Oh,
of
wow.
them. That's over 300 stores in the US, Canada, and the UK. I did a tour of about 24 stores in the United Kingdom when I was there for UK Games Expo. And over the course of visiting over 300 stores, I developed personal relationships with a lot of retailers. In fact, I've even stayed at 4 of their homes. I've gotten to know people as close friends. I stayed up till 3 a.m. or later talking with retailers.
Okay.
So a big piece of advice I have is, obviously it can get hard to sell to your friends at times, but is to use sales as not just, quote, networking, which some people look down on, but to view it as really getting to know people as human beings, first and foremost. When I visit a store, I give them a demo copy often, a free demo of Wing It, for instance, or of our other games. I definitely do a demo and I always time it. I say a minute or less. That's one of my tips for sales also is keep your sales pitch, your actual demo of the game really concise. I'll even say it's my party trick and I'll put a minute on my phone and I'll say I'm going to time it and I'm going to show you that I can do it in a minute or less. So I actually do that for each game.
Okay.
One of them is like a minute 20, but I can keep most of them to a minute.
Yeah.
And I also spend a lot of time at the store, whether it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, or even sometimes it's an hour, getting to know them, getting to know their store. Sometimes they'll give me a tour of the store. So it's really that personal touch. It's about developing real friendships.
Oh.
Another part I want to say is just spend as much time as you can at Gamma at nights, getting to know people on a personal level, as many hours as you can stay up. I usually don't go to bed till 3 or 5 in the morning, so that's easy for me. But, even if you're not much of a night owl, those after hours times are really important for getting to know retailers. Now, I will also say on the marketing end, I have a lot of room for growth. So I'll share that TikTok has been most successful. And then when I actually invest money in Amazon for pay-per-click, which is the sponsored product ads where you pay for keywords, those are areas where I'm the most successful. I don't tend to invest a lot of money in Amazon just because I don't really like doing Amazon ads, don't like giving money to Amazon. But with TikTok, it's the way that I've built an audience most easily. And I'm still working on it. I don't do it quite enough, but it's also the way that I do see some social media lead directly to sales. And I haven't noticed that with Instagram. When I used to occasionally use Facebook, I haven't noticed on there. And so for me, doing a TikTok video about Jewish Card Revoked, I'm likely to see, especially in the fall, a little boost online in those sales. On Amazon in particular, I should say. I don't make many sales on my direct website. So that's two pieces of marketing. It's just when you do, and I don't want to just say do TikTok, that seems very basic. So I'm going to go one level deeper. Lean into whatever your strengths are on TikTok. Be personal, be unpolished. Don't practice for an hour and give a perfect video. You just don't need to. That's more for Instagram Reels. For TikTok, very much personable, authentic is what sells. I mean, not necessarily literally sells, but gets people interested. So what I use TikTok for often is giving advice on early stage, marketing and sales of a game, on early stage development of a game, ask a retailer about a box, what to put on your box is something I did a video on recently. And I also will show my favorite cards and literally just highlight one card from a game, not even a playthrough. We're talking a minute or less. So that's another piece of advice is do sort of videos along different themes, whether that theme is here's advice I have to offer. Here are funny stories. I did almost several months worth of just funny stories for my business. I told the cheese story actually that I just told from Gamma. And so I guess I know it sounds very cliche to say be authentic, but literally just if you're weird, weirdness sells in this industry. Just be your weird, silly self.
Yeah. And for Amazon, there's definitely a lot of different things. I actually did a webinar recently just on Amazon listing optimizations and different advertising tricks for board games and toys, and that's literally what I do every single day. That's what I do.
I'm excited to watch your web.
Yeah, but I think you mentioned over the year you have launched a lot of different titles. Can you share which one that went out particularly well, and maybe some reason why some have that was really successful in your current portfolio of products?
Sure. So my best sellers far and away are Wing It and Jewish Card Revoked. You want to know why those are the best sellers in my opinion. And I can also share a little more broadly what I think makes a game sell.
Yes.
With Wing It, there are definitely other games like Wing It. There's the game 3 Things where you also use 3 things to get out of a situation. There's Danger where you get put in dangerous situations and use objects to escape. And then there's also Bucket of Doom, which is where you use one resource to get out of a really inappropriate situation, actually. So it's not that I didn't know about these, by the way, before I created Wing It. In fact, Wing It only came after Bucket of Doom and I found out about it later. What makes Wing It sell, I think, First of all, I put a lot of energy to it. It was like, of the 10 games and expansions I published, that was my first baby. So it's sort of like, I make a joke, it's like how the first child has the highest IQ. Like you can put all your energy and time into one game. And in some ways, that's actually much easier than having 10 titles. But I think what makes Wing It really successful is the quirk. We have a strong quirkiness factor to most of our games in my company. And people can see right away when they hear, for example, the situation card that I most frequently demo with Wing It is about being chased by a pack of rare carnivorous rabbits.
I love that
To a nature preserve in central Missouri. It's very specific. By the way, John and I, my co-founder and I, are both from St. Louis, Missouri. So not a rural area, but we get very specific. And there's a ranger station, but it's a mile away. Hunting season is over, and the rabbits are also protected species. So I've just given you several details in one short card about why it's such a big problem to be chased by carnivorous rabbits and some hints to how to solve that. And then you get 5 resources and you use 3 to solve the problem, just like some of the other games I mentioned. But again, we get really quirky with our resources too. So they're not necessarily objects that exist. The quote resources include people. Like, for example, we have the Olympic pole vaulting team, Wing It Beyond.
Okay.
It's one of our resources. We have a staircase that goes up forever. We have a box of kittens, right? So it's not so simple like a kitten or like a staircase, right? We go one level deeper. In fact, if anything, we're probably too detailed, but hey, it's sold over about 16,000 now. So, Wing It is really, I think, the heart and soul of what makes our company unique itself, which is we are just really weird, creative, quirky people, and we hire people even weirder than I am. And so that really helps too. So again, weirdness sells in board games. So I'm going to say that's one big takeaway from Wing It is weird, quirkiness sells. And also having a personal passion for your own games and making sure that passion comes across in the thousands of times that you're going to demo to retailers, which is the bread and butter of my sales is indie retail. Jewish Card Revoked is my second bestseller, but it actually surpassed Wing It a lot this fall.
Oh, okay.
Early September to late December, I had sold or pre-sold over 1,000 units of Jewish Card Revoked. And that's really good for a game that has a really niche audience, which is mostly American Jews who are also identifying as Jewish. They're not like just, Jewish name only. And the game has been out at that point had been out for 3 years and for 4 holiday seasons. Now, granted, it wasn't out until November of 2021, so it's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison. But the point is to say that 1,000 units in a few months is really great. And I want to speak to why. This is going to sound really crazy, but I actually think you can compare it to Wingspan. Wingspan is far and away a much better selling game. I'm sure that I know their B2C sales, like their business to consumer, individual consumer sales are much higher. And I don't emphasize that almost at all. So I'm sure they're doing loads more on Amazon, no question. But the reason I compare it is not in terms of numbers of sales, but to say, why is that a bestseller? Well, they're actually appealing to a very niche audience that happens to also be an audience that has a strong identity. So bird watchers are people who love birds. It's audience, but it's still pretty big in America.
Yeah.
It's also something that became really popular during the pandemic. Being Jewish is a very niche audience. So just so people know, there are 6 or 7 million Jews in the US and only about 13 million or 14 million worldwide. So it is a very niche audience. People who are actively Jewish, it's even smaller than that. And I say actively religiously or culturally. But we're really going for a niche audience in a similar way. And I think that finding game themes like Jewish culture and religion that appeal to a niche audience that you personally have a really strong attachment to, that you know really well, that excite you, that is a way to find a theme of your next game. So, and I will just say there was some talk on Twitter about the idea that Wingspan became popular because it was such a niche market, and it also exploded because birdwatching was really popular at a time when people couldn't do as many social events early pandemic. And lastly, I just want to add, I do think there is, based on my experience with Jewish Card Revoked, I think there's an untapped market for what I'll call cultural games. Whether that's, making fun of Indian American culture because you are Indian American and you know a lot of the quirks of being Indian American in the US, or whether that's, nerd culture, for instance, right? And so I think that that's another lesson, if I can take a lesson from Jewish Card Revoked, is unlike our games, just tell me what to do, or Wing It, which are very broadly themed as, storytelling or pitching games, it does pay off to have a cultural niche. And
Okay.
also, again, why games, this is going to sound almost cliche, but why games are successful in general, I think it's when you have unique mechanics, which is really hard to do these days with, anywhere from, I've heard, about 4,200 or 4,500 up to 10,000 games coming out in a year.
Yeah.
Unique mechanics and or mechanics that really work well with the theme.
Yeah.
Magic Maze is one of my favorite games
Mm-hmm.
because of the fact that it's a fast-paced, silent game racing through a magic mall. And why is it silent? Because mall security is after you, so you can't talk, right? Its mechanism go together really, really well. I'd say $1 million doodle, you see that too. You are forming essentially a mini PowerPoint on the dry erase pads in the $1 million doodle by each player contributing a logo for the business, a company name, a review for the business, and a slogan. And then you're pitching it much like you would actually pitch a business, right? So that's an example from our own line of games where with the $1 million doodle mechanism and theme go together really well. So those are some tips I have. Hope that provides some insight to people.
Yeah, that's some really good insight. And what are some of the mistakes that you have made along the way of launching games? And what additional advice will you give to other publishers to avoid them?
Oh man, Jason. Makes me feel painful thinking I'm back on the mistake. Okay, let's go back to the $1 million doodle. The $1 million doodle is a game that I love, and it has a really cute cover. It has a hedgehog jumping out of a toaster, and that is reflective of 2 cards in the game because the idea is you're always combining 2 different cards that you have to draw into a single image. So you'll get a word that says like comet or message in a bottle, and you have to combine them into one. And so, like, for example, a carrot and a outline of a person at a crime scene become a company where you use vegetables to kill off your exes. Sorry, that was a little violent. For example, that has happened in a playthrough.
Okay.
But the reason I mentioned the $1 million doodle is because it's a really cute cover of a hedgehog jumping out of a toaster, and it's very quirky, just like the nature of our company.
Yeah.
But if you don't know that the game is about creating businesses, you have no idea why there's a hedgehog and a toaster. And even if you do know that the game is about creating businesses, you still can't figure out from the cover why there's a hedgehog and a toaster.
Yeah.
I think we would have actually been better off doing something where we show 2 cards and showing them being combined into a drawing. I make fun of the game Telestrations cover because it's literally just showing people drawing funny things, but at least you can tell what the game is about, right? So I think we went a little abstract with that cover.
I see.
It's a little hard to tell what the game is about. And even though it is clearly a drawing on a napkin, no one knows you're forming a business. The $1 million doodle is a great name with great alliteration, but I suspect that one of the reasons it didn't sell very well is that we just didn't have a lot of clarity about what the game was about. And by the way, we did make a new cover based on retailer input, but another reason I think it didn't do great is we didn't run it by a lot of retailers. It would have been better to run it by more retailers. And then thirdly, it was just circumstantial. We launched that game when it came out, wait for it, in November of 2020, which is one of the worst times you could launch a party game in U.S. history. Because it was during the height of the pandemic. Vaccine wasn't out yet. The vaccine wasn't publicly available for months. And I felt guilty advertising the game because any marketing a party game meant that I was encouraging people to gather in groups. And gathering in groups was literally dangerous, Jason.
Yeah.
I think also I was afraid, or I felt bad really launching it with much marketing. And by the time I got to the next summer, I really wasn't doing much TikTok marketing. And TikTok was really where it was at. In fact, we learned in February, March of 2021, we learned from the head of TikTok board games at our Gamma trade show that board games were the 4th largest category on TikTok. And I really wasn't doing a lot of TikTok reviews for my new game. So I partly just like a basic marketing error. I didn't do a big launch for that one. And I really didn't know how to do Facebook ads geared toward people who lived with, say, 3 roommates or people who live with a wife and 2 kids who all played games. And it's a game for 4 or more people. So it was a failure of knowing how to market to a group that wouldn't be unsafe to market to. And also a failure once people were vaccinated in doing another sort of soft or even major launch. So it pains me to say this, but I think what people can take away is if your game is ill-timed on the market, all you have to do is wait a few months And nobody knows that it didn't just come out. Just do a fresh of TikTok videos or YouTube shorts or whatever it is. YouTube videos, by the way, are another untapped area, I would say. And that's another way I can improve is doing more YouTube reviews.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I want to pivot a little bit in today's conversation because I know you also have a wonderful initiative called Horizon Fellowship. Can you also kind of explain the initiative a little bit to our audience that's not familiar with what you're trying to accomplish?
I co-founded the Horizons Fellowship in 2020 with a group from the diversity team at Gamma. So we started the diversity committee at Gamma in 2020, and we did that in response to something that was like a huge problem that had happened at Origins that year with Gamma. In fact, Origins problems in 2020 that Gamma actually had to cancel it because a lot of the speakers decided to not speak. Well, in fact, a lot of the Black speakers dropped out, and so a lot of other speakers dropped out in solidarity. So we knew there was a big problem with Gamma at that point and its relationship with Black Lives Matter specifically. But I also want to add in, to be totally frank, there was a problem in the board game industry for years, which is that it's very male dominated and it's very white dominated. So most of the retailers are still white and male. And it's not that that should be an inherent problem if people aren't trying, but there are actually other potential retailers and publishers out there. And the problem is, how can we improve both the results of people starting businesses and how can we improve the pipeline of people coming into the industry?
Yeah.
So, and I will also just add in a personal note. This is not why I started the fellowship, but I just want to add in that I started my business in my early 30s. I just turned 40 last year, so now I don't count in that category anymore. But I could literally count on one hand the number of full-time women in publishing in board games who started the company in their 30s. That's a problem to me, that lack of diversity. So I wanted to add in that first. Okay, so just I'm going to try to do this really quick because I feel like I'm giving the long answer. So in 2020, we started the diversity committee. Then we decided to form a subcommittee called the Pathways team to actually found a fellowship to bring in more diverse retailers and publishers in the industry. The Horizons Fellowship is an 8-month accelerator, and it includes a free ride to Gamma in terms of free membership and free hotel and a stipend for food and actually a travel stipend. So not totally free. Then you also get money towards your business that you can use towards whatever you want. And then all the fellows get to apply for 2 grants that are $5,000 as well. And we have one retailer and one publisher win that grant.
Okay.
So what I also wanted to share about the Horizons Fellowship is it focuses on 5 kinds of diversity. So we work on diversity as far as gender, sexuality, religion, race and ethnicity, and disability. And disability can range anywhere from ADHD or being autistic to perhaps a mental health disability to a physical disability. So it covers different kinds of disability. And I also just want to mention that the Horizons Fellowship has seen some long-term results. So for example, when you go to Gamma now, you see a lot more people on the trade show floor in the exhibit hall who are Black or Asian American or maybe, or queer, they're LGBTQIA of some identity within that spectrum. And you definitely see a lot more women these days. So I remember early on when I asked back in 2018 in my first Gamma, where are all the women? And someone responded, oh, this is a lot of women. Like we were already proving then, and I didn't see a lot of women around. Okay. So flash forward 6 years later to 2024, I do feel a lot of personal pride at the fact that there are a lot more women in publishing now, and I'm hoping in retail as well. I can't speak as much to retail, but that was the big picture of why we started the fellowship. Now in its 4th year, by the way, I'm still on the team, although I've stepped back a little bit. The more personal story of why I launched the fellowship. Jason, this is really personal. Hopefully you'll have listeners who identify with this and see that we're making an improvement in this area. Someone pre-pandemic, it was either 2019, probably 2020, approached me at Gamma, a man who's in board game media, and said, "You're Jewish, so you'll get this." He said, "I have been in my hotel room alone crying all day because there's no one here who looks like me." And he was one of the only Black men at the show. I think he probably hadn't seen, there were some Black retailers who did come to the show at some point, but maybe he hadn't seen them yet, or maybe they hadn't arrived yet. But it's still true that, at that point, you could count on one hand the number of Black men at the show, and definitely on 2 hands the number of Black people who attended Gamma overall. And that's pretty sad to me. It's not like there are Black people who play games, right? And so it's silly, right? That doesn't make any sense. And so I felt like, well, I can't totally identify with you because there are some other Jews here at least, and because there are people, because I'm white, there are people who look like me, plenty of them here. However, I definitely got the idea of like feeling like a loner, like there's no one else, for example, who goes to the show who keeps kosher, and so I'm always having to get my own food or eat alone when other people are going out to eat. I have to bring all my own food, for instance. So I got it a little bit. And like him, I've had inappropriate lines over time said to me, for instance. But what really mattered to me in that moment and later in founding the fellowship is that no one should ever have to feel like there's no one else in a room in their industry who looks like them. No one should feel like there's no one around who looks like them. I want to reiterate that. And so part of the goal of the fellowship, and I think we've achieved this, is that people don't have to feel like that when they look around a room, that no one else there is queer or, perhaps disabled, although we actually have some room to grow in that area. Disabilities are often not visible, I should say. So, there often are disabilities that you don't see. And no one should feel like I'm the only one of my race here, So I think that's an area where we've made a lot of improvements. And I think, again, we still have a lot of room to grow, but I'm really proud of the work that we've accomplished.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
If anybody wants to apply for the Horizons Fellowship, the applications are usually open in June.
In June, okay. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. We'll make sure we also include that resources in the show note. And thank you for creating such a wonderful initiative. I think myself, I'm also a minority in the industry, so I can relate to what you're sharing as well. I think it's not easy to start a business, and especially in the board game industry, as it's getting more and more competitive over the years. There's more and more games that's coming out every single day. Sometimes it's hard to stay above the water with all the changes and all the the marketing and the sales that we need to keep up as the entrepreneur and the founder of the companies. So thank you so much for that particular initiative. Thank you so much for sharing that initiative with Horizon Fellowship. And as we're wrapping up in today's interview, the final question I always like to ask the guests is, if you have to share one piece of advice with someone that's just getting started in our industry, what would that be?
Ooh, Jason, just one is hard, and I just happen to think of a second one. So I'm gonna give one small piece that I'm sure is typical, and one big piece based on something I have coming up. Actually, that's really exciting for Flying Leap Games. But I'll try to be brief. My first and foremost piece of advice that I realized just in being on a panel for the Horizons Fellows and parallel program, the Rising Stars program yesterday, is ask for mentorship. Don't be afraid to ask even the big wigs in the industry for advice. And I say this because sometimes it can be a little intimidating or a little scary to approach someone who's been in the industry for 30 years, like Kristen Looney from Looney Labs, or Kurt, who's been in the industry 20 years, who runs Smirk and Dagger, in fact, more at this point, because they have these hugely successful games and because they know so much and they know so many people. But guess what? They're extremely nice. They're kind people and they're so approachable. So getting to know people who you feel like are rock stars and being willing to ask for mentorship on even the smallest things is really important. I can't tell you how many people I've asked for advice on what you do, Jason, the Amazon pay-per-click sponsored product ads. And I've had at least 3 friends or 4 friends coach me on how to do those better. I've had friends talk to me about, not worrying so much about Gamma. I have 2 new games coming out, but they won't be ready in time for Gamma in 2 weeks. And I feel really shy about that and sensitive because I showed them in early stage form last year, but they're just not ready to launch yet. And so one thing I've gotten coaching on is not to be afraid that people are there to see you at the trade show. And, they do care about your games, but that's almost secondary. People like selling games for people they like. So making sure you're approachable, of course, is important. But being willing to ask retailers and publishers for advice has changed my life on a personal, emotional, and professional level. That's the first piece of advice. And again, I'm going to cheat a little and I'm sorry, but this is what I do. The second one is not being afraid to take big risks. So for right now, I'm taking 2 big risks with new games or expansions I'm launching. One is I'm launching a strategy game that involves floating magnets that I'm super about.
Okay.
It's one of the things I'm most excited about. And that's a huge risk because I've never launched a strategy game before. Here I have a line of 10 games and expansions. How to Lose a Guy in 1DM, which was our dating game, came out with 4 expansions a full year and a half ago. Yeah. And I haven't launched any games since. And now I'm launching a game that's completely off brand for us. So, I'm a little bit scared about it. And just like with How to Lose a Guy in 1DM being our first 18 plus game, that was kind of off brand. Now I'm going off with the strategy game. So not being afraid of that and saying just roll with it and saying just because you had one identity early on doesn't mean you have to have that same identity as a company forever. And lastly, I'll just share we have another game that's a big risk for me coming out called Wing It Rebellion, And I didn't mean for it to be, but it turns out to be very politically well timed in that it's about how to run your own country or how to use comedy to overthrow a government. I didn't mean for it to be timed with Trump's election, I promise people. But it just happened circumstantially that I found out that there's a whole book out there on how to use comedy when you're challenging authoritarian regimes called Blueprint for a Revolution. So I read the book, and a third of our expansion, Wing It Rebellion, our standalone expansion coming out is called Wing It Rebellion. A third of our expansion is literally how to rebel against a government. That's kind of a risk because it seems like politically I might be labeled as a liberal company, or maybe it's too political and people are sick of politics. Like, I don't know. But you know what? I love the game and I'm super excited about it. And I'm just going to roll with it and hope that people also embrace it as being really important to our current political moment. So we'll see, Jason, but that's another piece of advice is don't be afraid to break your own branding and totally change directions and just see what happens. You know, what are you risking? You're risking like a print run of 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000. It's not going to make or break your company.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very interesting piece of advice. And for our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Toy Business Unboxed podcast. We really hope you have enjoyed the conversation and find it insightful and inspiring. If you like what you have heard, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. We really appreciate your support and would love that you can leave us a review and share the podcast with your friend and colleague. For more resource tips and the latest update within the toys and game industry, visit our website at toys-launch.com. Join the conversation and connect with us on social media using hashtag ToyBusinessUnbox. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. Until next time, keep innovating, keep creating, keep bringing joy to toys. This is Jason Shea signing off on the Toy Business Unboxed podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much, everyone.